My dear seekers of psychological truth, I am Sigmund Freud, and today I invite you into the most profound exploration of human consciousness you will ever encounter. For over a century, humanity has struggled with the same fundamental question that brings you here today. How does one achieve true emotional control and unshakable confidence when the very forces that govern our psyche remain hidden in the shadows of our unconscious mind? You have tried meditation, you have read countless self-help books, you have practiced positive thinking until your mind aches with the effort. Yet still you find yourself overwhelmed by emotions that seem to possess a will of their own. Still you discover that your confidence crumbles at most crucial moments, leaving you feeling powerless against the very psychological forces that should serve you. The traditional approaches to emotional mastery treat symptoms while ignoring the root cause, like attempting to stop a river by placing stones in its path rather than understanding the underground springs that feed its flow. What I am about to reveal to you will fundamentally alter your understanding of human psychology and provide you with the precise psychoanalytical framework needed to not merely manage your emotions, but to transform them into the very foundation of an unstoppable confidence that emerges from the deepest layers of your psychological being. The secret lies not in suppressing your emotional nature or forcing yourself into artificial states of calm, but in understanding the intricate relationship between your unconscious drives, your earliest developmental experiences, and the sophisticated defense mechanisms your psyche has constructed to protect itself from perceived threats. Through my decades of clinical observation and the development of psychoanalytical theory, I have discovered that true emotional control emerges when we bring the unconscious conflicts that drive our emotional reactivity into conscious awareness, allowing us to integrate these powerful forces rather than remain at their mercy. Imagine possessing such complete understanding of your own psychological machinery that external circumstances lose their power to destabilize you. Imagine having such profound insight into the workings of your own mind that confidence becomes not a fleeting state you must constantly maintain, but a natural expression of your integrated personality structure. Before we embark on this transformative journey together, I want you to take a moment and reflect on this question. What would your life look like if you never again had to fear the unpredictability of your own emotional responses? Share your thoughts in the comments below, for in the act of articulation, we begin the process of bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness. Let me begin by addressing the fundamental misconception that has led you astray in your previous attempts at emotional mastery. The popular psychology of your era treats emotions as simple chemical reactions to be managed through breathing techniques or cognitive restructuring. But this mechanistic view fails to recognize that emotions are the surface manifestations of deeply rooted unconscious conflicts that originated in your earliest relationships and formative experiences. Every emotional reaction you experience as an adult is connected to what I call the emotional blueprint established during your psychosexual development, particularly during the oral, anal, and phallic stages of childhood, when your ego was forming its primary defense mechanisms against anxiety and threat. Consider for a moment the last time you experienced what you might call irrational anger or unexplained anxiety. From a psychoanalytical perspective, there is nothing irrational or unexplained about these responses. Your unconscious mind, operating according to what I term the pleasure principle, is attempting to protect you from perceived threats by activating emotional and behavioral patterns that once served a protective function during your formative years. The businessman who experiences overwhelming anxiety before important presentations is likely reliving unconscious memories of childhood criticism or rejection. The woman who finds herself inexplicably angry when others succeed is probably processing unresolved feelings of inadequacy that originated in her relationship with parental authority figures. The path to true emotional control begins with what I call dynamic insight, the process of uncovering the unconscious connections between your present emotional reactions and their historical origins. Unlike surface-level emotional regulation techniques that provide temporary relief, dynamic insight creates permanent psychological change by resolving the underlying conflicts that generate emotional reactivity in the first place. When you understand that your fear of public speaking stems not from the immediate situation but from unconscious associations with early experiences of shame or humiliation, you can begin to separate your adult reality from these outdated emotional patterns. This process requires what I term therapeutic courage, the willingness to examine aspects of your psychological development that may have been too threatening for your childhood ego to process consciously. Many of your strongest emotional reactions serve as defense mechanisms against acknowledging painful truths about your early relationships, your unmet needs, or your frustrated developmental strivings. The individual who experiences intense jealousy, for example, is often defending against unconscious feelings of inadequacy or fear of abandonment that originated in early attachment relationships. The development of unstoppable confidence follows naturally from this process of psychological integration. True confidence, as opposed to the brittle pseudo-confidence promoted by popular psychology, emerges from what I call ego strength, the capacity of your conscious personality to effectively manage the competing demands of your unconscious drives, your moral conscience and external reality. When your ego possesses sufficient strength and flexibility, You no longer need to expend psychological energy suppressing threatening emotions or maintaining artificial personas designed to hide your perceived weaknesses. Through my clinical work with thousands of patients, I have observed that individuals who achieve genuine emotional mastery share certain psychological characteristics. They possess what I term analytical self-awareness, the capacity to observe their own mental processes without becoming overwhelmed by them. They have developed what I call sublimation skills, the ability to channel potentially destructive emotional energy into creative and productive activities. Most importantly, they have achieved what I describe as neurotic resolution, the successful integration of previously conflicting aspects of their personality structure. At this point in our exploration, I want to pause and create a moment of deeper connection between us. I need to ask you something that goes beyond the intellectual understanding we have been building together. Do you ever feel truly heard in your struggle with emotional control? Not just acknowledged or advised, but genuinely understood at the level where your deepest fears and aspirations reside. I suspect that much of your journey toward emotional mastery has been quite lonely, filled with well-meaning advice that somehow missed the mark of your actual experience. In the comments below, I want you to complete this sentence. The hardest part about managing my emotions is, and share as much or as little as feels comfortable. This is not merely an exercise in engagement, but an opportunity for what I call vicarious analysis, where the act of articulating your struggle in a supportive environment begins to activate the same psychological processes that occur in formal psychoanalytical treatment. Your willingness to share creates a therapeutic community where others can recognize their own patterns reflected in your honesty, and where you can begin to see your challenges not as personal failings but as universal aspects of human psychological development. Now let us continue with our exploration of the unconscious foundations of emotional mastery. The relationship between emotional control and confidence becomes clearer when we examine what I call the anxiety hierarchy that governs human psychological functioning. At the most primitive level, we experience what I term signal anxiety, the ego's early warning system that alerts us to potential threats to our psychological equilibrium. This form of anxiety serves an adaptive function, preparing our mental apparatus to respond to genuine challenges or dangers. However, when our early developmental experiences include trauma, neglect, or inconsistent caregiving, our anxiety response system becomes hypersensitive, generating what I call neurotic anxiety, in response to situations that pose no actual threat to our adult selves. The individual who experiences overwhelming nervousness during social interactions is likely responding to unconscious memories of early social rejection or criticism. Their nervous system, governed by patterns established during critical developmental periods, interprets present social situations through the lens of these early threatening experiences. The key to emotional control lies not in suppressing this anxiety response, but in understanding its historical origins and gradually retraining the unconscious mind to distinguish between past threats and present realities. This process involves what I call corrective emotional experience, deliberately exposing yourself to situations that activate your neurotic anxiety patterns while maintaining conscious awareness of their historical origins. Unlike the gradual exposure techniques promoted by behavioral psychology, psychoanalytical exposure work focuses on the internal psychological processes occurring during anxiety-provoking situations. You learn to observe the emergence of unconscious material, to recognize the defensive strategies your ego employs to avoid threatening feelings, and to gradually increase your tolerance for the anxiety associated with psychological growth. Consider the common experience of performance anxiety, whether in professional presentations, artistic endeavors, or intimate relationships. From a psychoanalytical perspective, performance anxiety represents a conflict between unconscious exhibitionistic desires and internalized prohibitions against being seen or evaluated. The child who was criticized for seeking attention learns to associate visibility with danger, creating unconscious associations between performance and punishment that persist into adult life. True confidence in performance situations emerges not from techniques designed to calm your nerves, but from resolving the underlying conflict between your natural desire for recognition and your learned fear of judgment. The development of what I call analytical confidence requires understanding the difference between healthy narcissism and pathological grandiosity. Healthy narcissism, which forms the foundation of genuine self-esteem, develops when a child receives appropriate mirroring and validation for their authentic self-expression. Pathological grandiosity, on the other hand, represents a defensive reaction against feelings of inadequacy or shame, manifesting as an inflated self-image that requires constant external validation to maintain. Many individuals seeking to develop confidence unknowingly pursue pathological grandiosity, attempting to construct an idealized self-image that denies their human limitations and vulnerabilities. This approach inevitably leads to emotional instability, because the grandiose self-image cannot be sustained without continuous external reinforcement. True analytical confidence emerges from accepting both your strengths and limitations, understanding how your unique psychological development has shaped your particular talents and challenges, and learning to appreciate your authentic self rather than pursuing an impossible ideal. The role of what I call transference patterns in emotional regulation cannot be overstated. Throughout your daily interactions, you unconsciously relate to others through the lens of your earliest relationship experiences, particularly your relationships with parental figures. The authority figure who triggers your anger may unconsciously represent the critical parent who never acknowledged your achievements. The peer whose success generates your envy may activate unconscious sibling rivalry patterns established during childhood competition for parental attention. Understanding your personal transference patterns provides invaluable insight into the triggers that destabilize your emotional equilibrium. When you can recognize that your intense reaction to your supervisor's feedback stems not from the present interaction, but from unconscious associations with early authority relationships, you gain the psychological distance needed to respond to the actual situation rather than the historical pattern. This recognition does not immediately eliminate emotional reactivity, but it begins the process of separating past and present that forms the foundation of emotional mastery. The concept of working through becomes crucial at this stage of psychological development. Working through involves repeatedly examining the same unconscious patterns from different angles until they lose their compulsive power over your emotional responses. Each time you consciously recognize a transference reaction or defensive pattern, you weaken its unconscious influence and strengthen your ego's capacity to choose conscious responses over automatic reactions. This process requires what I call therapeutic patience, the understanding that psychological change occurs gradually as unconscious patterns are slowly brought into conscious awareness and integrated into your adult personality structure. The popular psychology emphasis on rapid transformation fails to recognize that deeply rooted emotional patterns developed over decades cannot be altered through weekend workshops or brief interventions. Genuine emotional mastery emerges through consistent self-examination and the gradual expansion of conscious awareness into previously unconscious territories. The relationship between emotional control and creative expression deserves particular attention in our exploration. Many individuals seeking emotional stability make the mistake of attempting to eliminate all emotional intensity from their lives, not recognizing that emotions provide the raw energy for creativity, passion, and authentic self-expression. The goal of psychoanalytical emotional work is not emotional numbness but emotional intelligence, the capacity to experience the full range of human emotions while maintaining conscious choice about how to express them. What I term sublimation represents the highest form of emotional mastery, the capacity to transform potentially destructive emotional energy into creative and productive activities. The individual who channels their aggressive impulses into competitive sports or business success, the artist who transforms personal suffering into meaningful creative work, the therapist who uses their own psychological struggles to develop empathy for others. These examples demonstrate sublimation in action. Sublimation allows you to honor the intensity of your emotional nature while directing it toward constructive ends. The development of sublimation skills requires understanding what I call your libidinal economy, the various ways your psychic energy seeks expression and satisfaction. Different individuals possess different configurations of drives and interests, creating unique patterns of optimal sublimation. The key is discovering the activities, relationships, and creative pursuits that allow for the natural expression of your authentic emotional energy, while contributing to your psychological growth and social connection. Modern neuroscientific research has provided fascinating validation for many psychoanalytical insights about emotional regulation and confidence development. Studies of neuroplasticity confirm that the brain patterns established during early childhood can be modified through the type of conscious self-examination that forms the core of psychoanalytical practice. Research on attachment styles demonstrates the lasting impact of early relationship experiences on adult emotional regulation, supporting my theoretical framework regarding the historical origins of present emotional patterns. The field of trauma research has particularly validated psychoanalytical understanding of how early adverse experiences create lasting changes in emotional responsivity and self-perception. What modern psychology terms complex trauma closely parallels my observations about how early relational trauma creates defensive personality structures that persist into adult life. The therapeutic approaches that prove most effective for complex trauma emphasize the same elements central to psychoanalytical treatment: the development of insight into unconscious patterns, the resolution of internal conflicts, and the integration of dissociated aspects of experience. However, I must emphasize that intellectual understanding alone is insufficient for achieving emotional transformation. The process I am describing requires what I call experiential engagement, the willingness to feel your emotions fully while maintaining analytical awareness of their psychological significance. Many individuals attempt to use psychological insight as another form of emotional avoidance, analyzing their patterns intellectually while remaining disconnected from their actual emotional experience. True emotional mastery emerges from the integration of thinking and feeling, the capacity to maintain conscious awareness while allowing yourself to experience the full intensity of your emotional life. This integration process often involves what I call corrective regression, deliberately allowing yourself to experience emotions and needs that were suppressed or distorted during your original development. Through this process, you can provide yourself with the emotional experiences necessary for healthy psychological development that may have been missing during your childhood. The development of what I term analytical empathy represents another crucial component of emotional mastery. As you develop insight into the unconscious forces shaping your own emotional responses, you naturally develop greater understanding and compassion for the psychological struggles of others. This empathetic capacity enhances your confidence in interpersonal situations because you no longer need to take others' emotional reactions personally, recognizing instead the historical and unconscious factors that influence all human behavior. Analytical empathy also protects you from manipulation and emotional exploitation because you can recognize when others are operating from their own unconscious defensive patterns rather than responding to your actual behavior. The individual who understands projection, displacement, and other defense mechanisms is less likely to internalize others' psychological projections or to interpret interpersonal conflicts as evidence of personal inadequacy. The role of dreams in emotional development deserves special attention in our discussion. Dreams provide direct access to unconscious material, offering invaluable insight into the emotional conflicts and developmental issues that require conscious attention. Learning to work with your dreams through free association and symbolic interpretation provides an ongoing source of self-analytical material that supports continuous psychological growth and emotional integration. I encourage you to begin maintaining a dream journal, recording not only the manifest content of your dreams but also your associations to the various dream elements. Over time, you will begin to recognize recurring themes and symbols that reflect your ongoing psychological development. Dreams often present creative solutions to emotional conflicts that your conscious mind has been unable to resolve, providing guidance for your continued growth toward emotional mastery. The concept of therapeutic alliance becomes crucial as you undertake this journey of emotional transformation. While formal psychoanalysis provides the most comprehensive framework for this work, you can develop an internal therapeutic alliance by learning to relate to yourself with the same compassionate curiosity that an effective analyst brings to their patients. This involves developing what I call internal analytic capacity, the ability to observe your own psychological processes with interest rather than judgment. Creating this internal therapeutic alliance requires overcoming what I term superego tyranny, the harsh internal criticism that often accompanies emotional struggles. Many individuals sabotage their emotional development by subjecting themselves to the same critical attitudes that originally created their psychological difficulties. Learning to approach your emotional patterns with scientific curiosity rather than moral judgment creates the psychological safety necessary for genuine exploration and change. The integration of what I call psychological opposites represents the ultimate goal of emotional mastery work. Rather than attempting to eliminate negative emotions or uncomfortable aspects of your personality, the goal is to develop sufficient ego strength to contain and integrate all aspects of your psychological nature. The individual who achieves this integration no longer fears their own emotional intensity because they understand how to channel it constructively. This integration process involves what I call creative tension management, learning to tolerate the psychological tension that exists between competing drives and desires rather than prematurely resolving it through defensive strategies. The capacity to sit with psychological ambiguity and uncertainty while maintaining emotional stability represents the highest form of emotional maturity and forms the foundation of unshakable confidence. As we approach the culmination of our exploration, it becomes clear that true emotional control and unstoppable confidence cannot be achieved through external techniques or artificial personality modifications. These qualities emerge naturally from the psychological integration that occurs when unconscious conflicts are resolved and defensive patterns are replaced with conscious choice. The confidence that emerges from this process requires no external validation because it is rooted in authentic self-knowledge and the acceptance of your complete psychological nature. The journey I have outlined requires considerable courage and commitment, but the rewards extend far beyond emotional stability and confidence. Individuals who undertake this work often discover creative capacities they never knew they possessed, develop relationships of unprecedented depth and authenticity, and find meaning and purpose that emerges from their unique psychological configuration rather than external expectations or social pressures. I want to acknowledge that the path I have described is not easy, and there will be moments when you question whether the effort is worthwhile. The process of psychological integration involves encountering aspects of yourself that may initially seem threatening or unacceptable, working through emotions you may have spent years avoiding, and challenging beliefs about yourself and others that have provided a sense of security even while limiting your growth. This is why I have created this channel as more than just a source of psychological information, but as a community where individuals committed to genuine psychological development can support each other through the challenges and celebrate the victories that emerge from this profound work. When you subscribe to this channel, you join a group of seekers who understand that true emotional mastery requires more than surface-level techniques, who are willing to undertake the deep psychological work necessary for authentic transformation. Each video I create provides another piece of the comprehensive framework needed for psychological integration, another tool for understanding the unconscious forces that shape your emotional life, another perspective on the relationship between past experiences and present challenges. The individuals who benefit most from this work are those who approach it as an ongoing journey of self-discovery rather than a quick solution to emotional difficulties. If you are ready to begin or continue this journey toward authentic emotional mastery and unstoppable confidence, I invite you to like this video to let me know that this analytical approach resonates with your understanding of psychological change, and subscribe to join our community of individuals committed to the profound work of psychological integration. Remember that every step you take toward understanding your own psychological nature is a step toward the freedom and confidence that emerge from living in accordance with your authentic self rather than the defensive patterns created during your earliest developmental experiences. Your journey toward emotional mastery is ultimately a journey toward becoming the person you were always meant to be before early experiences taught you to hide behind defensive strategies and artificial personas. The courage you demonstrate in undertaking this work is itself a sign of the psychological strength that will ultimately provide the foundation for the unshakable confidence you seek.